Morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. Well, just gone 9 o'clock because we're late because of the school run. It's Wednesday. It must be hump day. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist and associate editor, Kevin Maguire. Morning, Kev.
Morning, Foxy.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to make a load of outlandish claims about things you don't understand and see how far you get. First off, though, I must say we are going to have no discussion of the Prince Harry court case today, not because we are cowards, but because the right place for those discussions is the courtroom and not here. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on calls for rugby heroes Kevin Sinfield and Rob Burrows to receive an honour for their amazing struggles. In the case of Kevin, through multiple fundraising challenges, and Rob through motor neurone disease. Now, inside there is a great interview and pictures with Rob's wife showing her commitment to caring for him. It's a great read. Please search it out and have a look for it. Your day will be improved by doing so. But I want to take us first to page 2, where the COVID inquiry set up by Boris Johnson's government has finally begun. And it has announced that next week it expects to have Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApps, even though the government is launching a legal review claiming it shouldn't have to hand them all over. Now, Kevin, this seems like an interminable process. We haven't even got anywhere near the meat of the thing yet. Is the government really going to push ahead with a judicial review into handing over WhatsApps when the inquiry's already got a load of them?
I know. Well, it seems to be at the moment, and George Freeman, the science minister, admitted on BBC Question Time last Thursday it would probably lose. It's kind of bonkers, you know, that old Dennis Healy maxim, when it all stopped digging. Well, they're at the controls with JCB, they're in the cab of it, and they're digging deeper. They set up the inquiry. They give Heather Hallett, Baroness Hallett, an independent peer, a former Court of Appeal judge, powers to call whatever she wanted. She's called what she wanted, and they're now trying to block it. So you think, what have you got to hide? You're undermining your own inquiry, intentionally or otherwise, and you will almost certainly lose in court. I think it's become just another sign of a government that has lost its way. It's become incompetent. It's making silly and daft decisions and scoring lots of own goals.
What do you think, everybody? Do you think that it's absolutely right the COVID inquiry should see all the ministers' WhatsApps unredacted, or do you think it's only fair to hold some of them back because they're personal or not somehow relevant, according to what people outside the inquiry would think? Mike says, morning, Mike, is this shady government really going to go through a judicial review? Every legal opinion says they'll lose to try to keep information from the COVID inquiry. Has Sunak given up, worrying how bad this makes him look? It's got to be said, Kevin, that this, as I can remember, this row started with Boris Johnson firing lawyers and getting upset because he was being reported to the police for things that were found out in his private diaries. And it seems to have moved on to blaming Rishi Sunak and making him look bad.
Yeah, he is.
How could that possibly have happened?
Yeah, Boris Johnson unusually went for the moral high ground and said, let's give everything over immediately. Then we discovered he wasn't given his first phone for the crucial period of 2020, switch phones. And then he said, I'll give that, but I've never used it before. But it is, you've got to wonder whether it's the current Prime Minister and senior ministers who are worried, because some of this information could come out in the run-up to the next general election, expected in the autumn of next year. And some of it could be embarrassing. If you're Rishi Sunak, it's what did you say about the Eat Out to Help Out scheme in the summer of 2020, or the Eat Out to Spread the Virus scheme? How much of that was PR? How much was it economic? What health advice did he possibly ignore. That could be very embarrassing. I spoke to Nadine Dorries, the former Culture Secretary, she's the Health Minister at the time, and she's handed over her stuff. And she was just chatting about the process. And you give all your stuff, and the inquiry isn't just going to publish asking your partner, have you got any milk in the fridge? Is the cat being fed? They use keywords to get all the data, but you could get the point, and we saw this with Matt Hancock's messages, where he rather unwisely gave them to a journalist who then dumped them in public, that you get criticism of other ministers.
Yeah.
And you do override advice, you don't follow the guidance, and that'll be testing. But if you're going to have a public inquiry which finds out what happened, and I think we owe that to the victims and the survivors, their families, people who just had their lives turned up, you also want to learn lessons for the future in case this happens in some shape or form in the future. But they're just now playing, I think, for short-term political gain. Yeah. That's what they're doing.
Well, never mind in case it happens in the future. I think we splashed on Monday that it was about to happen with a resistant TB virus. So it very much needs sorting out. Although I personally do quite want to know what sort of messages the PR department sent Rishi Sunak when they heard about the Eat Out to Help Out slogan and the advice they gave him about that, because that would be funny. And what do you think, everybody? Do you think that Nadine Dorries' information is solid? Do you think Boris Johnson's gone for the moral high ground? Do you think he even knows where it is, and could he find it with a map? It does seem to set a bit of a precedent, though, doesn't it? So Boris has handed over his WhatsApps. We know Matt Hancock has given his, Nadine's given hers. People who are out of government seem a bit more willing to do it than those who are in government at the moment. And it does mean that anyone who doesn't do it is going to look pretty bad pretty quickly, doesn't it? So what else could be in those WhatsApps?
Yeah.
The other end of it, which is what they're presumably still trying to protect.
Yeah, precedents are being set in previous inquiries, whether I'm just thinking, as you chat now, I remember covering the Leveson inquiry about 12 years ago, actually, in the ethics of the media. I remember reading some very embarrassing messages from David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, to Rebecca Brooks, the head of the Sun and the Times and everything. Or you go to the Grenfell inquiry, there's been some stuff that's been very uncomfortable for ministers. The precedent is set. It's like the government is trying to claw back what's been happening in the past. But they set up the inquiry. You made Heather Hallett, Baroness Hallett, queen of her inquiry, and you've just got to respect it. She's not going to data dump and make public irrelevant messages. She will have a forensic team of lawyers going through what's considered relevant and what's not, but it has to be her decision rather than the Cabinet Office decision, when that's a nerve centre of government under political control and will be seeking to spare the blushes of the politicians at the time who were taking the decisions. It's got to be up to Hallett to decide. So she's not going to do all that. Have you fed the cat? Have you got the parcel from next door? That'll be irrelevant. She will look at all the major decision making and the chats, because Tony Blair used to be criticised for having government by sofa, sitting at the sofa with mates and chewing the cud and making big decisions. War or not in Iraq. Well, this lot do it all on WhatsApp, and if it's all on WhatsApp, then the inquiry needs to see what was being said and done on WhatsApp. It's just as simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I've shared WhatsApps with people in government, and once or twice I've said, "Is this okay? Do we need to be more careful? Do we need to, you're going to be, at some point, you might be found out talking to a Mirror journalist, which may not be a good look for everybody." And they go, "That's fine. I can talk to her I like." And they don't seem to have computed that some of these things can be declarable and come back to bite you on the bum at some point. But not when you talk to me, of course. Now, what do you think, everybody? It does say right at the end of this piece that the Cabinet Office is willing to agree another way forward. And that's a quote from the Prime Minister's official spokesman. It's not a source. So the PM spokesman says we can agree another way forward. We can find some kind of way out to wriggle out of it. It does seem like an increasingly unsustainable position that they're going to try and argue with the law on statutory inquiries, which is very old and is very solid, and which everyone kind of agrees that, as Mike said, they're never going to be able to win this judicial review. What kind of face-saving compromise could they possibly come up with, though? Having said they don't want to hand them over.
Yeah, I think it may be to give them, excuse me, to third-party adjudicators, a team that will decide whether it is, the information is relevant or not. If Heather Hallett agrees to that, you never know, she might, in order to speed up the process and get her hands on the information and get what she wanted anyway, because some of the stuff will be screened out. It's not, I can't re-emphasize enough, the inquiry isn't just going to publish every single WhatsApp message on Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak's, Jeremy Hunt's, Priti Patel's, who Matt Hancock's fan. They're just not going to do it. I've no doubt when Matt Hancock and the Telegraph had this and didn't use it too, there would have been WhatsApp messages about Gina Coladangelo, the infamous space invasion, when we saw him kissing and sort of fondling her, the breakup of his marriage. You won't get that.
Please don't.
Yeah, no, it's a terrible image. I know you've just come back from the school run. You don't want to know about that. I know. It's not going to be like soft porn. They're not going to have any of that, or the heartache of somebody's marriage being, falling apart. That won't be there. But if all of a sudden he says, Gina, fancy a snog later. By the way, I think Johnson's got this totally wrong. He's blown the decisions because he's always off with Carrie or having parties in Number 10. Well, that would be relevant. And it would have to be up to Heather Hallett and her team to make that call. She might make the opposite call. I doubt she would. But that would be relevant.
Exactly. Yeah. And we'll have to see how things go. But I think I'll put my faith in the judge knowing roughly where the right end of things is, as opposed to Boris Johnson or the Cabinet Office, who, in my experience, can't find their asses with a map. Now, we need to move on to the biggest story of the day, as far as most of the world is concerned, which is the mysterious destruction of a hydroelectric dam in the south of Ukraine. I say mysterious because it's put thousands of Ukrainian lives at risk. It's removed the ability of cooling the reactors at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, and it's made it impossible for Ukrainian tanks to cross on their summer offensive, to cross the river and operate in areas that are controlled by Russia and, as you can see there, King Neptune. Now, Kevin, who could possibly benefit from doing all that to Ukraine?
Yeah, you always look who benefits on any scandal. Sometimes there's a kind of cock-up theory as well as a conspiracy theory that can come into play. But you see, it's a clear advantage to Putin. This has happened as the Ukrainians push for their offensive. Well, now they can't use the road across the dam. They've got a problem of Kherson being flooded. 40,000 people may need moving, as you say. The nuclear power station could be jeopardized, although where it could backfire for Putin's forces is it also supplies water to Crimea, a Russian annexed area from 2014 that Putin is desperate to hold onto. But it's kind of typical of the scorched earth policy of Putin's invaders. They just trash, bombard, turn to rubble, everything. So I think that's where the finger will point. And it would be a war crime to destroy civilian infrastructure in this way. I will just say, as a quick aside, NATO did it in Serbia to some extent, targeting power stations and the TV station back at the end of the 1990s. But no, I think it's quite clear here. And the pictures in the mirror or the live pictures as you get to the water flowing on mirror.co.uk, just absolutely incredible. It's kind of the stuff of a disaster movie, but this is absolutely deliberate. And if Putin's forces can kidnap school children, rape, murder, execute, torture, this is just an extension of it, and it's the Russians preparing to repel the long-anticipated offensive.
Yeah. Then what do you think, everybody? Get into the comments. Let us know your questions. Do you think this is definitely a Russian attack? Do you think it's a Ukrainian false flag operation or something? Do you think that there's going to be a problem with the nuclear plant? Now, it should be said that there are 22,000 Russians also at risk. And as Kevin said, the drinking water is going to be limited on all sides. So whoever did this has caused damage everywhere in all directions, which is exactly the sort of thing Putin does generally like doing. He does like this scorched earth policy. Same thing's been seen in Syria. But it should be pointed out that the Ukrainians have got drones and shells. It's pretty hard to break a dam with those things. As anybody who's recently marked the Dam Busters anniversary would know, you need some pretty big explosives to break a dam. Now, the Ukrainians say that a mine was exploded inside the dam at 2:50 a.m., while the Russians say it was an attack. But if that's the case, then basically it's the Russians saying that the Ukrainians are amazingly powerful, have very heavy artillery and the ability to bomb infrastructure that's supposedly under Russian control. So it's sort of counterproductive. If Russia's right, then Ukraine should have won the war by now. But we're sort of waiting for the intelligence community to join the dots here and make an announcement if they ever do. But it sounds exactly like the sort of thing Putin would do, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, that is exactly it. Like, if you're Ukraine, you don't want to trash your own country. You want the Russians out, and you want to be able to rebuild your country. You don't want to make that a harder task. Now, the Russians, particularly where that dam is, and that river is a boundary. It's a way of repelling Ukrainian counteroffensive. So you take out a bridge, you take out a tunnel, you take out a dam, you make it harder for the Ukrainians, and it's a war of terror, and I think it's a war crime. Will anyone ever be prosecuted? Almost certainly not.
Well, have any Russian presidents lived very long after being president, Kevin?
Well, I know I suppose Gorbachev did for a while. Yeltsin for a bit, but you're quite right. What used to happen in the, if you look at Russian history, up to 1917, you were a czar until you died. Then who came along next? Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko. They all stayed as rulers until they died.
Yeah, they die in power, or someone. It's more an issue of whether or not they're poisoned, stabbed, or executed.
Yeah,
that's the natural cause of death for a Russian president. So. It may get to the point that you say Putin never really gets to stand trial for any of this stuff. Now, one of the big issues, right? This doesn't just affect Ukraine; it affects you at home as well, wherever you're watching this. Because one of the big issues is that nuclear plant. It used the waters that were held back by the dam, which incidentally was also making power, so people in that area are without that too. But it was using those waters to cool the biggest nuclear plant in Europe at Zaporizhzhia. Now, if those reactor cores don't maintain a steady temperature, then the how can I put it, the reactions inside them, the radioactive reactions, can escalate and get out of control. They can go critical and get an explosion or a leak, which is exactly what we saw at Chernobyl, well within living memory. Now, James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, is calling this a war crime. People are being evacuated. I suspect it's not just to avoid the wet patch, but the possibility of other things going horribly wrong. Is all that too strong, Kevin? I mean, if there is a big explosion at the plant, then that affects all of Europe, doesn't it?
Yes, and that nuclear plant has been in danger month after month. It's occupied by the Russians. There's been shelling of it, both sides blaming each other. It's been fortified, so the Russians put soldiers in who then the Ukrainians can't attack, and it's terrifying because, of course, as we saw with Chernobyl, if there's a nuclear incident, of course it will affect us. It doesn't stay local, but it's also flooding agricultural land, and Ukraine was a bread basket not just of Europe but much of the world. It's one of the reasons food prices have gone up, the disruption to grain. So it is very serious. It's not just a war, a long way away. We can just disregard. I mean, this is on our continent. It is impacting us, and the Russians know that. There's a psychological war as well as that physical war.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's an awful lot of things that could possibly go wrong there, and it all depends, of course, on fallout and wind patterns and goodness knows what else. But Chernobyl came this way, and there is no reason to think each other wouldn't. And of course, there are nuclear test veterans in many families around this country that can tell you what the effects of fallout are over the long term, and they're not pleasant. Although it's amazing, isn't it? The government doesn't want to admit what happened to the nuclear test veterans when they're in a nuclear fallout, but they want you to be very worried if it happens to come here. Crikey, so it's not completely safe. What a surprise. Now, speaking of attacks, right at the bottom of that page there's been some discussion by the Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, yesterday, saying that we need to beef up the protection of our own undersea cables that supply oil, fuel, energy, gas and telecoms to us in case of Russian attack on them. There have been stories about Russian submarines supposedly being active in the North Sea and around those cables and pipelines. And Kevin, this bemuses me a bit because while, yes, it's a good idea to look after those things, they're very important bits of infrastructure. Without a submarine being parked over the top of them all day, every day, how could we possibly keep this safe from someone who wants to do something to it? Is this just saber rattling?
Yeah, I would have thought.
Are they spreading fear? What is it? Why are they doing it?
Yeah, I would have thought it's just as the Russians found with the Nord Stream gas pipeline that was damaged in several points by explosions. Almost impossible to defend, as you say. You could try and track vehicles or submarine ships that you think are a threat. In fact, the Royal Navy has ordered a couple of ships for that. Not there yet, so that's going to be some time. But no, it's just incredibly vulnerable. We kind of lived in a world where you thought the threat wasn't there physically anymore. There's end to war in Europe. Well, the Balkans showed that wasn't the case, and now this has proved the same. And our infrastructure is incredibly vulnerable, and you can't. It's almost just an understanding with the Russians that we won't attack theirs and they won't attack ours. That's I think that is the level it is at, because if they targeted cables, it would be very, very difficult to stop them. They're often shown in the war as unthinking brutes who aren't very sophisticated, but in fact they are as well. I'm not defending the invasion. I think it was unprovoked. There's been absolutely horrific crimes on it. The Russians need to be out of Ukraine and people held to account. But the fact is they can be incredibly sophisticated too. Exactly. If they want to take out those cables, I think there's been nothing we could do.
No, there probably isn't, is there? But as you say, the MOD have ordered a couple of ships to try and spend some money on trying to, pretend that they are looking after these things. Although how 2 ships are going to do it is beyond me. So maybe the reason that the ministers start talking about this is because they want to grease the money pipeline a little bit and make sure these things come through. There's always politics going on. Now we do have one little comment from Pete on Twitter, who says, I made a mistake sending a WhatsApp this morning. I've never been in politics, so I don't suppose anyone's that bothered. But the moral being, there's too much of this. Philip Schofield's and Harry's shenanigans day after day. I feel the same way about that. So I think he's generally a bit negative about the idea of going through people's WhatsApps in case people say something that's wrong or they've made a boo-boo on there. But to be honest, Pete, if they're making boo-boos on WhatsApps, they shouldn't be governing by WhatsApp. That's kind of, oh my God, do it properly if you're making cock-ups, because you're not a normal member of the public. You've got a very important job. Anyway, we do have some, thank you for explaining all that, Kevin. Get into the comments if you want to ask any more questions about what you think is going on with Russia and Ukraine, who you think's to blame, whether you're worried about possible nuclear explosions. Gosh, all those things could happen. I can't believe we're even discussing it. But in the meantime, we have found some good news. There is light on the horizon. We found it for you, and here it is. Now, next time you sit down to a big curry, you're probably going to be telling yourself that you'll regret it in the morning. It's loaded with calories, and let's face it, you're probably drunk. But worry no more. Nottingham Trent University, thank you guys, has found that shots of turmeric given to Rotherham United players helps them recover from match injuries and return to fitness more quickly. Yes, okay, they're having it in pure shots of turmeric, and if you don't want to do that, there is plenty of the stuff in a curry. So, Kevin, is this proof that sitting down to a massive plate of madras will turn us all into professional athletes? Please say yes.
Oh yeah, with a large portion of pilau rice, couple of sides, some sagaloo.
It's the bhaji that will do it for you.
Yeah, a keema naan and 5 pints of lager. Yeah, and then you'd be playing like Haaland. No.
I was hoping it would sort out my abdominal issues.
I think, yeah, if only. I think it does just show you there is a spice, a single spice when you have your curry. So maybe you would be better just off having a little teaspoonful or however much of turmeric you can take.
Yeah,
but
turmeric tea is supposed to be quite good for you, but I don't think anyone really likes that. So, I mean, Madras is really, let's face it, that's the way we're all going to get the turmeric in our systems. Maybe Man City and West Ham players will all be considering it, though, and chugging a load before their matches. We can but hope, can't we? Right. Well, we found some good news. Maybe the whole world's going to go to hell, but who benefits from things? That's what you need to think about. Who benefits from the biggest stories of the day? Who benefits from blowing up a dam? Who benefits from eating curry? Us. That's it. Right. Thank you, Kevin, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review so other people can find us. Otherwise, we will see you again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda Explained. Come back on these channels at 12 o'clock for Prime Minister's Questions, because Rishi Sunak is in America today. It is Oliver Dowden, the deputy, whatever he is, and Angela Rayner, who probably smack him about the room a bit. So come back and watch that if you want to later on. Otherwise, we'll see you next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda Explained. Till then, everybody, tatty bye.